Hi everyone and welcome. MoreGoodDays would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country across Australia and their deep ongoing connection to land, water, culture and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and to all First Nations people, both here listening on this recording and throughout the world. So welcome everyone. Today we're discussing this More Good Chats topic, Beyond Information, how learning about pain helps your nervous system rediscover what's safe and possible, with pain researcher, Associate Professor David Kennedy. So in this session, you'll expect to find out more about why understanding pain is, more than just information, how it can support real recovery, look at what the evidence says about how learning about pain can help your nervous system feel safer, and some practical ways education can really influence behaviour. So, before we dive in, just inviting all those listening to really bring as much openness and curiosity as you can. If education has felt frustrating or overwhelming for you in the past, that makes sense. Today isn't meant to be about just overloading you with more information, but about some real understanding how this can influence your recovery. And we know and acknowledge that education can sometimes feel dry and abstract, and that's what we're hoping to, maybe change your outlook on that a little bit, hopefully. So, yeah, we know that the evidence suggests that it can have an impact on outcomes. So, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest, Associate Professor David Kennedy. David's both a professor, an associate professor and physiotherapist with over 20 years clinical experience, focused on how our understanding of perception shapes pain and movement and recovery. His research has explored thoughts, context, environmental influences, pain and behaviour, with a real strong emphasis on translating pain science into practical tools people and clinicians can use. He's also the co-founder of One Thing, a series on YouTube about modern pain education, which I highly recommend everyone go check out. And alongside his work, he also studies sensory and perceptual recovery after stroke to improve functional outcomes. So, David, welcome. And before we get started on the education stuff, what first drew you to this space? And I'm wondering if there was any aha moments that have come along the way.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Mandy. Look, I too would like to just quickly acknowledge that you guys are in Australia and I'm in Canada, so I would like to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, Songhees, and Kapsefs and the Esquimalt peoples on whose territory I live and work on, and the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. So I'm coming from across the world, and I used to come from Gadigal country, and now I'm coming from Lekwungen country. So that's pretty exciting. And that I also feel like that's important because it does inform a lot of the things that I'll probably end up talking about today a little bit, as it turns out. What brought me to all that, I guess that's the question, right, is I guess the thing that got me moving much more in this pathway was working as a physiotherapist. I was still am I'm trying to, on the verge of getting registered here in Canada so I can continue working. And the initial questions were really around fatigue. I did a lot of work in exercise science and exercise phys, and I would have patients telling me, like, I just can't do this exercise anymore. It's just fatigued. I can't do it. I'm like, is it pain related? And they're like, oh no, the pain hasn't really changed any, but I just still can't do the work. And so I started like, there's got to be some connection between the pain that you're experiencing, the fatigue, and the fact that you want to do this, but you can't. And so I couldn't really sort that out, which is what drove me to end up going and doing a PhD and trying to figure that part out as best I could, and recognizing that there are really sort of, within our nervous system, central mechanisms to protect ourselves. And so when we do experience like high intensity exercise that is painful, our system kind of protects ourselves and says, okay, well, you're not going to be able to drive the muscle anymore. Even though you want to, you can't, right? We're just not going to let you do it any further. And so you just lose some of that drive. And so that really got me thinking more and more about the pain space. And I've been practicing in that for a long time. Well, really since I started as a physio. And it always was intriguing to me that it was this complex thing. It wasn't just, I stubbed my toe, it hurts, or I have arthritis in my knee and it hurts. It was never that simple. for me. I sprained an ankle, it just hurts. I think I've seen 4 of those in my career, it seems like, that were just regular ankle sprains without a lot of other stuff going on. And so that's really what set me down this path, was just constant curiosity and recognizing this thing is bigger and more complex than we're letting on most of the time.
Yeah, and so interesting that it was fatigue that got you on that sort of journey, because we work with a lot of people with fibromyalgia, of which fatigue is a huge symptom, and so we know all about that complexity, and sometimes it's picking it apart where people can find some real insights. So yeah, maybe we just start with the basics, I suppose. Some people can think education, bit of skepticism about how that could possibly make a difference to somewhere in my body that's feeling sore. So what do we know about why learning matters?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's a tricky one. I think you've highlighted some really good points of like, it's my shoulder that hurts. Why are you trying to talk to me about education and like trying to understand pain? What does that have to do with the fact that my shoulder hurts? Like, I don't care, right? Just fix it, right? And that's a huge sort of hurdle to overcome, and you have to navigate that, I think, thoughtfully. You've got to meet the person where they're at and go, are they ready to receive any sort of information about this? Because it's very easy, as I'm sure a lot of people are aware, that you can dump a whole bunch of information on people about pain all at once and just leave them in the weeds, not knowing what's happened to them at that point. So I think, it does matter that it needs to be pretty strategic, and part of that conversation between the therapist or the clinician and the person experiencing pain is, the evidence is pretty good. I mean, we can talk about that down the track a little bit, but interestingly, it comes out that education doesn't stand alone. It's not a standalone sort of thing. It has to be done in conjunction with other stuff, and that makes sense, because really education is, something that the other person has to engage in, right? One of our first One Thing interviews with Lorimer Moseley, one of the key takeaway things that he said in there is that learning doesn't happen to you, right? We think as an educator now, that's sort of what you think. You stand up in front of class and I'm gonna educate you, and you're gonna learn as I'm talking to you. But it doesn't work that way, not at all, right? Learning doesn't happen to you. You have to engage in it, so it has to be coming from the other side as well. And so that's usually like the biggest thing. And then you can try and find those little bit of nuggets of, hey, what things don't quite add up? Like, okay, your shoulder hurts, but how long has this been going on? And nothing seems to make it better. And so we could try and figure out what that is, or we could maybe talk about some other things that might be going on. And I think that's a tricky conversation to have. That's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's following that person's curiosity, like when you can find that one thing that they maybe go, yeah, that has actually never really been very well explained to me, like, can you help me unpack that a little bit? And I love that idea of it being a two-way street too, because people probably are used to education being the model of a school, and at school it is a person up the front saying this is what you need to know, and it's all at you. So flipping that
instead of with you, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, pain education, I mean, can you tell us what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to maybe change? Is it someone's beliefs? Is it their nervous system? Is it their behavior? Is all of it?
Yes. Next question. It is such an individual thing. I think broadly what we are trying to do is create that awareness. Folks, for the most part, and it makes sense, think really in a Cartesian way of, I hurt my thumb or my finger and there's a pain receptor, and that pain receptor is going to send a signal of pain up the pain pathway to my brain, and then I go, oh, I have pain. But we know that the biology doesn't work that way, right? And so that becomes a really hard conversation to have with someone who's like, well, look, biology doesn't work like that. And you may not want to know anything about biology, and that's fine. We can kind of move around that. But when we're talking about something that is persistent pain, an avenue that I tend to go to or towards in some of this, and trying to figure out how to gain access and pick that first sort of thing, is to say, look, we have a lot of systems, right, in our body. We have a skeletal system, it's our bones, right? You break a bone, that system is broken, it heals up in about 6 weeks, and things are kind of good to go. You have muscles, you can strain them. right? There's a whole muscular system that has tendons and ligaments and things associated with it too. And those things heal up over time. But turns out you have a nervous system as well, and an immune system. And both of those are equally valid systems. And guess what? They have a lot to do with perpetuating your pain. And that's part of that protective mechanism. And I think that's the, when we look at Haley Leake's paper on what mattered to people who are getting pain education, like what were the main messages that were coming through? There's the hurt doesn't equal harm, which is a tricky one, because it's hard to recognize that how do things hurt, but they don't cause harm. And we can talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we're currently doing with that. And then I think one of the other key ones that had come through is that everything's changeable. And that's maybe a more important in some ways. Like, look, the thing about bones is like, they heal pretty quick, but they don't change much. The bones are bones. And the muscles are kind of that way too. You can exercise them and make them bigger or make them more endurance-based. But our nervous system and our immune system, they change all the time, right? You look at Mark Hutchinson's work where he's looking at things changing in the neuroimmune system on a nanoscale, right? We're talking about molecules and genes changing things based on pain, right? Coming into the system from all sides, from a very large meter sort of scale all the way down to small things. And what we don't know is how those things change, how quickly, what makes them stick to the change, what makes them change back. I mean, those are things we don't understand, but we know that it changes, and that gives us a lot to work with. And so I think for the education piece, I think trying to get that part across, like things are really changeable and adaptable, and it's coming from this other system. It's not your bone, it's not the muscle, it's not the ligament anymore. Those systems are doing pretty well. But this nervous system, this immune system, they're the ones who are not working the way we want them to. And they're not working in a bad way. They're just being a little too protective. And so they don't know any better, right? They're just being, hey, we just got to make sure everything's safe. That's a good thing, but not to the detriment of you getting to live your life. And I guess that's the other key part is like, how do you come back into it? Like, really, part of the education is finding joy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Accessing what that person really truly wants, and that's going to be very individual for each person. And I mean, I love what you say about that. These systems are changeable, and even that in itself, I think, can give people a lot of hope. Because maybe you can speak to perception and how that maybe influences people's willingness to take on board these things. So, we'll encounter people often that'll have, report, oh, but someone, insert clinician here, said, I'm only going to get worse, or it's degenerative, or they've heard all of these terms which really impact their perception of, I've only got a downhill trajectory, there's nothing I can do about that. So, can you speak to that a bit about in terms of how education can help change that perception?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a good paper. It came back, it was actually by another fellow Canadian here, Katie Burney. And it was a qualitative paper looking at, and she asked clinicians, which is maybe one step off of maybe asking the actual people with lived experience, but we certainly have heard the same messages coming through. So it just really validated a lot of what we've heard, particularly like through all the one thing videos and that sort of thing. And like, what are the harmful kind of things to hear? And one of them is, that's the end of the road. Hey, this is it. You're just going to have to live with it.
Yeah. That one. That old chestnut. Yeah, we've all heard that one.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, part of that is the deficit model of being in a biomedical system that's just looking at deficit and fault, right? Our job in medicine is to find what the impairments are, what the deficits are, and then go, okay, well, we either can address those and make them better, or we can't. And if we can't, well, then you're just going to have to live with it, and it's probably not going to get any better. Sorry. And that message is devastating and not true, which is the interesting thing. And at least in the pain space, right? That is not true. And I think there is a lot of sort of doom and gloom coming from practitioners, whether they intend to do it that way or not. They think, oh, well, look, these are, you've got degenerative changes in your spine or in your knee or whatever it is. And they don't clarify what that means. And it's not going to get any better because we can't do anything about arthritis. So, you're just going to have to just keep trucking along. Even if you're trying to be somewhat optimistic in that sort of message, it's not an optimistic one at all. And it never plays to the person's strengths. And I think that's a key message. And it's something that we've been discussing in our group here, and we're trying to look at, putting together a little paper that looks at a more strength-based approach. It's kind of coming from some indigenous knowledge users that we've been discussing with, because they have a different worldview. It's not a deficit model, it's a strengths model. We're like, well, you already have a strengths model, maybe we should talk to you about that. And it focuses on what the person can do. And that's a very different direction. And sometimes the education piece then makes a lot more sense when you start talking about, well, you can do this. So why do you think you can do that, but you feel like you can't do these other things? And that becomes an area of, you're right, I don't quite understand that. Well, that's an educating moment, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I just want to reiterate what you said about the fact that that is not true, that it's only a downhill trajectory. It's really important and for people to hear, and it can be really empowering for them to know that they have that ability to change things, with the right support and the right education. So thank you for saying that. And yeah, I'm really interested in this idea as well about, using Indigenous wisdom and strengths-based model and focusing on the things you can do, because in my experience, in my recovery, has been a really big change as well, that rather than continually focusing on what you can't do and the negative part and the fear and all of that stuff, actually, what is still open and available to me, and how can I pursue those fun things in life as well, bring back the joy and the safety. So yeah, I'm interested to hear any more about that, if you have any more to say on it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the classic examples, and I'd spoken with her a few times prior, but we did do an interview with her for one thing, is Joetta Belton. And Joetta, you probably know who she is. She's now a patient advocate for IASP, so she is really taken up. But I'm mixed. I love her story in a way, but it also makes me tragically sad most of the time, from a profession standpoint, because here is somebody who had experienced really a minor sort of injury that just blew out into something that was really major in terms of pain, that just really kind of ruined her life, is the way she talked about it. She lost her identity, right? And that's often something that happens in chronic pain, and it's something that we, again, if you're just thinking about the biomedical model, you're not going to address somebody's identity. It doesn't come up in your history-taking tick box thing. But it is something we have to consider. And then again, thinking about a whole person, not even holistic, but like whole person with a W, right? This is a whole person approach, which is, again, kind of being, for me anyway, starting to be much more informed to this Indigenous lens, is that the identity matters and community matters, and that who that person is in their community matters. And Joanna talked about that a lot. She's like, I lost all my friends, I lost my work, which was my identity. And then what did she do? She went back to university and educated herself about pain. She saw one video from Laura Ramose and went, oh, wait, something's off here. There's something else going on. And then proceeded to just educate herself on all of this. And when I talked to her, and I talked to her a couple times since, is that, like, if you pinned her down and said, look, do you still have pain in your hip? Are you still somebody with chronic pain? And she's like, oh, yeah, I don't care. Like, it doesn't stop me anymore. She's like her whole life again. She has this whole new life now as a pain advocate. She's got her friends back. She's enjoying her life, and she's found joy in the things that she's doing. And I think that's really all we're trying to get to. And education can be a pathway to that. I mean, it's one part of the pathway.
Yeah, and for her, like, she's built this whole new community, really, in the pain science field. Like, she's just so, a big part of it. And I think in this recording, I'll link to her Substack, because her writing is just, absolutely beautiful in terms of explaining what it is like to have all of these things happen to you and all of these changes. Yeah, I'm a massive fan of Joe's. And it also just reminds me of another great video, which I might link, which is from Tamar Picus, which she talks about pain sort of just taking over, and it sort of becomes this only thing that is your identity. And then if we can slowly add back in little bits more of other stuff, it can just have a really huge impact. Yeah, so I mean, like, we're here at MoreGoodDays, we're all about like evidence-based approaches. So can you tell us from your research, like, what do we know about education in terms of how it affects clinical outcomes for people living with pain?
Yeah, so I haven't done any direct stuff with that myself, but lots of other folks have, and there's been a lot of recent stuff coming out. And I mean, I think for me as a clinician, I looked early days to Adrian Lowe's work, looking at pain education and say, low back pain, and saying, hey, look, this actually is pretty effective. Where, and if you coming from Australia, like I think Chris Marr has spent a large part of his career really debunking things that people thought would work for low back pain. Just going like, oh, we did another randomized control trial, and we're not finding anything that has any effect. And other than basic exercise and return to activity, and some patient education seems to come into it now. But in early days for me, it was really Adrian's initial work that sort of set that off. But now there's lots of stuff on it, and there's been some recent stuff too. I think he had sent me one specific to low back pain, but there's been a recent one in the Journal of Pain. I was just going to look and see when it came out. Of course, I can't see it because I can't see my glasses on. But the title of it's Pain Neuroscience Education for Adults with Chronic Musculoskeletal Pain, and it's a mixed method systematic review and meta-analysis. And they did a really nice job of 2019, there it is. So it's still fairly recent with a meta-analysis showing that pain education is effective across multiple outcomes. So, mildly effective with pain. Like if you just took pain as the one single outcome, it's not perfect, but we know that, right? If all you're kind of doing is pain education, that's not perfect. And even if you're kind of combining it, there's a lot going on that you may not change the person's pain all that much. But all the other outcomes, disability, kinesiophobia, all that sort of stuff, definitely a huge change in the whole thing. And so there's plenty of evidence showing education works. The tricky part, I think, where we are now is what does that look like? And how do we get that in the hands of people? The work that I have done in education has been with students, so with physio students, and trying to teach them like, hey, do you know anything about pain? And if you don't, then can we teach you? And does that stick at all? And we found that is helpful. We're doing some current work here in Canada where we're trying to get an idea of what that educational volume looks like. And so that's still kind of work in progress, but it was done early on across professions, so not just physio, back in 2009. And of course, the hours that people got in terms of actual pain education for clinicians was minuscule, right? And so we're hoping that that's improved, but we have a feeling it hasn't all that much. So because we need to target that in a large way. And then the other work that I have done, we looked at, well, look, if somebody says, okay, look, I've just done this chronic pain state, and they're like, good luck, it's all downhill from there. You're on your own, see what happens. And what do? You're going to Google it, right? And so this was kind of before the AI thing, so who knows what the AI stuff looks like now. But at the time, we just thought, okay, well, let's just what happens if we Google persistent pain and chronic pain and a bunch of other similar type terms? What kind of information do people get? And interestingly, in Australia, I'll back up a little bit. Across the board, Google was terrible for the most part. It didn't really, like most of the stuff was too high in terms of literacy rate. Like it was like people couldn't understand it. And then for the most part, it didn't really tag the main things that you needed to know. And so that's obviously a problem. They're not getting any quality information. When we looked at like the Australian state health websites, so like New South Wales Health, they had great information, but it was way over everybody's head. And then we looked at it in other countries. So we looked at it in Mexico and in Nepal, and there was nothing. And it was all in English. There was like hardly anything in Spanish or Nepalese. So like the simple access points aren't there where people are going to go and look. And I'm not sure that AI is going to be all that much better. I mean, we'll see how well it gets trained up. But if people can't even get good information just on a simple access to like the internet, and then you go to a practitioner and they haven't been trained because they've been educated, and then they give you bad information about things, you can see how it would be, the education part becomes a mountain to overcome in some ways.
Yeah, and it sounds also like this sort of speaking a little bit too as well to the social determinants of health as well, in terms of like even access to a computer for some people is difficult. Right. And then if the information is not necessarily accurate, I feel like in Australia sometimes people might Google and they might get to like Lorimer's great video, and I'm like, that's cool, get to that video, and that's a really good starting point. Right? So many people have come back and said that was a key turning point, was like starting to go down that rabbit hole by by an entry point like an accessible video like that. So yeah, and you've spoken to some of the benefits, I suppose, of learning some of this information. I mean, is the reverse true as well? Like if you don't get access to this, or if you get continually, we've already sort of touched on it a bit, but continually told the outdated information or misinformation, like can that actually make your pain worse?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely, and then so there's two sides of that, I guess, and on the one side is some really basic research stuff that we just finished up that we're kind of working on, where we told people, look, there's a potential for harm. You're going to step on stuff that could hurt you. And in the one instance, we told them, look, we have this cream that can really protect your foot when you step on this stuff. So it's not going to really hurt that bad at all, comparatively. So they would step on it like, yeah, okay, that really hurts. And then put the cream on and they're like, okay, that's going to really protect you. And then we also had a cream that said, look, this is also going to make it hurt a heck of a lot worse. It's going to make it really sensitive. And there was a whole spiel to the whole thing. Of course, the creams didn't do anything, right? They were placebo. But there was a big, pony show and what these things do, what they look like. They had names, they had, chemical things on them, and we really sold them. And when we looked at belief, people believed us. They thought, yeah, this is actually going to, change whatever it is that's going to happen here. And the interesting thing that we found was that when we told them it's going to hurt more, it did, which that wasn't terribly surprising. But, in most pain experiments like that, when you tell them, well, it's going to be protective, it's going to help you usually see an effect. In our case, we didn't. Yeah. And part of that was because the stimulus that we use is something that is well known to cause pain. So there's a long history with this particular stuff that will hurt you. And no matter what we kind of try to tell them, we couldn't overcome that. And so what you say to people does matter. And sometimes the way that how much you say it, and that has to interact with their own history, may not have much of an effect. So there's a lot to overcome there. On the other end, I think what I'm seeing, particularly here in Canada, because I think there are less overall resources that have been going into educating the public around pain and clinicians around pain in particular areas. It's challenging. So there's still a lot of biomedical model pretty heavily across the board. And in those folks that are entering into that biomedical model, they're definitely getting worse, right? By the time they get to a clinician who knows something about pain science, not even talking about the education part, just understands the complexity of pain. They've been at it for a year with being told all kinds of things that are really unhelpful. And that's a tough group to start working with because they're so far behind with bad information that you have to go and debunk it. Like one of the clinicians I was talking to was like, yeah, sometimes my hour-long session with the client is spent debunking all the stuff that people have been telling them for the last year. I didn't even get to do my job right, as it's supposed to be, because I have to I know you've been told that, but let me, and in a way that's kind of a form of education, but that's a hard kind of education.
Yeah, it certainly is when they've had years and years of fear upon fear upon fear, and yeah, definitely resonates with my own experience of 3 decades of chronic pain. To then start getting those messages changed, it's a lot of programming to deprogram for sure.
It is, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we've been talking about how pain is very complex, it's very individual. Education is kind of one kind of part that people can do to help change some of these perceptions, change their pain. What else? I mean, we talked about a few things, but what else can people do alongside this kind of understanding their pain that's helpful?
Yeah, so I mean, the evidence stuff is pretty clear. The exercise piece is a huge part of it, and that's a tricky one too, because you can't just say, oh well, go out and start running marathons or whatever. You have to sort of pick and choose. But there is that connection between the education piece and the exercise piece that's really critical, and I think that comes into that. If you can get there, try to find that joyful thing that people do. Whatever that is. If there's something you like to do, then let's focus on doing that, or being able to get to where you can at least do some of it, and tying that in with the education piece of what that's doing for you and how that's changing things. If you can't get to the joyful part because it's still just too hard to do, then I think the exercise piece does become a bit of that exposure therapy concept where, hey, let's just try and experiment with a couple of things that would normally really, you would think would set you off. Like you have a lot of fear about like, oh, I can't possibly move my arm like this because that's going to be the worst thing ever. And you adapt and change the context of it and when it occurs. And then you're like, oh, by the way, look, your arm is where it is. And like, oh yeah, it is. Like, oh, but is it, right? Is it like, so it's creating those discrepancies sometimes in the fear of movement and trying to work through that. So the exercise piece becomes education in of itself. And that's why I think the two work so well together, why we see in the, RTCs and that sort of thing, like education and exercise activity far outperform everything else.
Yeah, and it just makes sense, doesn't it? Because if you can help bring down some of the fear related to exercise or movement with the education, then it makes movement and exercise much more possible and accessible, I suppose, for people. And
I would just add, like, I always hesitate to say the word. I mean, I'm an exercise background person, but I always hesitate to use the word exercise because a lot of people are like, oh no, I don't want to do that. And like, that's not really what we're talking. I mean, it can be if you're okay with that, that's what it can be. But if you're not okay with it, that's good too, because that's not what we're talking. What we're gonna part of this idea is that this communication between the practitioner and the person with lived experience is that we've got to find the thing that you're interested in. What is it that you enjoy, that you want to try to do? And let's find something that you can be successful at, or find a way to be successful at part of it. And that just needs to be movement based in some way.
Yeah.
And if we can get that happening, right, then you start celebrating these small successes, and then that does become that strength piece again. It's like, look, you can do this. I've always been moved by a colleague of mine who was working in a pain clinic, and he had a patient who was coming in on a pretty regular basis, but always like an hour late. The appointment's at 3, they're showing up at 4. And he's like, that's fine. Look, I can only spend like 15 minutes because I've got to juggle between other people, but I'm going to take 15 minutes and we're going to sit and talk. And the goal is next time you're going to come in 15 minutes closer to the actual scheduled appointment time. But how the conversation, and they finally got there and all that. But to me, the thing that I took away from it was that he started those conversations with, how you didn't think, because they would just talk like, oh, it took me all day to get out of bed. It took me all day to get showered. And then it took me all day to do this. Then they get in the car and they get down here and be able to walk into the clinic. And he's like, are you kidding? That's fantastic. Good for you. Like, you could have just stayed in bed, but you came in to see me anyway. You are capable of doing a lot of different things, all the crazy things that have to go on for you to get from wherever you live down here to see me. Those are all really things you can do. They're all movement based, and that's what we want to tap. So if you can show up 15 minutes earlier next time, we can start talking about them already.
Celebrate those small wins, because sometimes they get overlooked pretty quickly. And it's actually just occurred to me, we're talking about education, which is really about like, I suppose maybe for some people it's like reigniting like curiosity. And so bringing in curiosity to like everything, all parts of your life. Oh, what happens when you get out of bed? What are the first thoughts that kind of come in? So I suppose with my mindfulness background, I kind of think that curiosity just kind of could come in everywhere, and that's an education sort of inroad, I suppose, of just like, oh, how interesting, I wonder what's going on there, just to get the person thinking about other alternatives. And people may have had poor, histories or backgrounds with education. And so some people do like resist or want to just think, oh, I don't want to do that. Is there any suggestions in terms of ways that we can approach that respectfully and really try and encourage people to get involved in the pain sort of science components?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a tough one because it is so down to the moment. And I think that's what makes working in the pain space far more challenging than a lot of the other, particularly in physio because we do have time. I think as a physio, I think as a physician, it's even harder because you have no time. But it is taking that time and sitting with them and listening to find out what those things are you can tap into. Like if I'm doing all the talking, we're not going to be successful because I don't know enough to know where to come in on that. Like to go, I wonder if we talked about this piece, that would lead you to being accepted, to wanting to get some education around that particular topic. If I haven't listened to you in the first place, I'm never going to figure out what those things are. And so if there's any one piece of advice, just zip it and sit back and be quiet and listen to what the person's telling you. They'll tell you a lot about what they're willing to access and what they aren't. And when you find that thing like, oh, they're kind of open to this, that's an avenue to jump into. And then, for me, I keep trying to think about how do we play that as a strength? And really, if we can extend that, because again, the person sitting across from you isn't sitting across from you in isolation. What does that community that they're from look like? And how can they support some of that? Sometimes that education comes through the community. It's like, I'm not listening, but my partner was listening. And then they're kind of like, we made some interesting points. I hadn't thought about that before. And they're like, zip it. I'm trying to be, I don't want to be engaged right now. I don't want to hear, but those little things as part of community start chipping away and can be supportive in terms of gaining access to some of this information, I think.
Yeah, there's lots of different inroads, particularly when you're open and listening to what the person's, actually experiencing or engaged in. And you've given some really great advice there for clinicians, in terms of how they can facilitate that too. So, David, I know you're the co-founder of that amazing YouTube channel, Resource One Thing, where you ask pain researchers and clinicians, as well as people that have lived with experience of chronic pain, what has been their kind of one thing. So I'm kind of keen to ask you, what's your one thing? But I probably think it's fair to say that you could have a couple because, it's probably a lot. But yeah, what's one thing that you wish everyone with chronic pain or clinician maybe understood?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Josh and I have we start off with doing one thing, and then we kind of tweaked it to what we didn't the one thing, because we know nobody has just one thing. There's always multiple things, and then we've sort of jokingly asked ourselves that back and forth a couple of times, and boy, we get stuck really quick. Like, oh geez, there's so much. I don't know why. Like if you ask me today, it'll be one thing, and if you ask me tomorrow, it's going to be another one thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think, like, if you were to ask me what it is today, it is that concept of trying to focus on the other person's strength. Like, if there's one thing you can do, is like just stop trying to treat everybody like they're a problem. They're not a problem. They're a person, and they got strength, and find that. That can really change things in a big way, if you can do that. And if you're somebody who's experiencing persistent pain, try to find your strengths, right? Because everything is, as you mentioned, everything is, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, oh, this is too bad, oh, everything's spiraling down, away you go. But if you can try to find one thing that brings you joy, then that's the one thing I want you to do, right? Because I think that starts to change stuff. The joy is a big deal. And within one thing itself, the series, we've been doing it for 5 years. We're still thinking we might do a little 5-year recap sort of thing. And we've been thinking about, like, what are some of the main things that people have said to us as we walk away? And we've talked to a lot of people with lived experience, and the consistent message. So I'm going to kind of go with, like, these are really consistent messages that come across. Validation that pain is real. It kills me that still has to be such a strong statement to have to keep saying. But we do. Because we keep hearing people left, right, and center every time we talk to them, like, boy, if you could just validate the fact that this is real, it's not in my head. Like, this is a real thing. And if you're not buying that, then I'm not in the right place. And so that's just come through again and again. And someday I hope that we never have to say it again. Like, everyone gets it. Like, pain is real. We accept that, and we can move on. I think the idea that context matters a lot, and the safety of it, right? we think of pain as sort of this averse experience, but it is, but it doesn't exist in this vacuum of biology, right? It exists in this world that's complex around us. There's lots of things going on. I'm struck by the person I was talking to who said to me, I was having a lot of back pain. I moved away from the situation that I was in. It got better. I thought, okay, I'm in a good space. But then circumstances ended up back in this crazy situation again. Immediately, the back pain came back. And then got away from the situation and eventually, managed to get some things resolved and got away out of the situation again. And thought, oh, that's it. I'll be fixed. I'll be cured. It wasn't, right? Mm-hmm. That contextual stuff that gets in matters. That psychosocial stuff impacts our biology, and our biology impacts our social and psychological factors. They work together, and I think that's an important message that has come through multiple times there in subtle ways. In one thing, it's like there's a lot there, and context matters. We need to think about that stuff. Mm-hmm. And then, it's not hopeless. We've heard that a lot. Like, it's not hopeless. That's another consistent message throughout the videos.
Yeah, which is such an important message to get people to hear, that hopeful message for the future, and that pain is changeable, it's real, and it's all very contextual. And I've heard people say pain is it's a human experience, and like being human involves all the different ups and downs of our individual lives. So thank you so much for putting that resource together. I think it's an amazing resource for people to check out, and we'll link to that below. Before we wrap up, David, anything you really wanted to say that we haven't yet covered, or any last sort of messages for anyone listening?
Gosh, I don't think anything off the top of my head. I guess the only other thing, around one thing worth sort of mentioning, I suppose, in terms of people that might see this, is why we did it. We didn't
I'd love to hear that.
The reason that we did it was we realized, initially it started off as like, oh, maybe there's a space there where researchers can talk about the work that they're doing and try to get that message out. So it was that was the initial drive. And we started talking to people and realized, no, you know what, there is something to just one thing. Because you never know what the person's one thing's going to be, where they have that aha moment and go, oh, wait a minute, I get it. Because we see that in the clinic, right? When we talk to people, you're kind of plodding along and you're doing okay, but everybody's working really hard, but you're not really getting there, and it's kind of slow going and trudging through the mud, as it were. And then they walk in one day and they go, I never thought about this before, but this one thing, and then you're like, and you're like, I don't know, everything's different now. Like, there's no going back. Like, once you have that, there's no turning around and going, okay, I'm going back over there where everything was awful. You can't do it. There's so many of those aha moments in this field, and so that's what one thing became. It's like, okay, we're just going to compile a whole lot of one things, because you never know what one thing is going to be for that one person that might change it.
Yeah. It's so good. It's actually just made me remember what one of my I've had many aha moments over the many years that I've lived with this, but just quickly, my one was actually during my pain management clinic when I was in hospital, and hospital doors open out, right, to protect, the people in case someone needs to come and get them. But I was used to, pulling in, and like for the first week in hospital, I think I pulled that door and banged my head like that many times. And then like in the second week I walked in and I went like that, and I was just like, oh my God, like ingrained patterns can change, habits can change. And it was just like, from then on, I was just like, oh my God, it's changeable. That whole thing just landed because of a toilet door. So it can be, it can happen in the randomest places. But just thank you so much, David, for your time today. We really appreciate it, for sharing your insights and your experiences. I also want to just give a deep honouring to you and to your ongoing work, helping people make sense of this crazy thing, pain, that many people are living with, and also to the clinicians that are supporting them. So thank you again for all the work you do. And if anyone's listening and is experiencing back pain, whiplash, musculoskeletal pain, fibromyalgia, back pain, and you want more support, please do reach out to us. Our program and our friendly team are here to support you. You're not alone in this. And yes, check out in the resources below this recording for some of the research we've mentioned, as well as the link obviously to the One Thing. And yeah, just take a little moment after listening to this recording to pause and think of something that maybe has landed for you. Maybe there's been a light bulb or an aha moment and you've found one thing in this conversation. So I really hope that is the case. And yeah, look forward to hearing how people have taken this information to maybe take that next step, which is taking that one thing and putting it into action. So thanks again, David. Thanks everyone for listening, and look forward to seeing people next time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks.